How was the glory of 1 vs 1000 created in Dynasty Warriors? The Dynasty Warriors games are at their core deeply rooted in the history and nostalgia of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the classic Chinese historic novel. When we look at high-quality, next-gen graphics and footage of modern Dynasty Warriors games, it's hard to not reminisce over how far the series has come, and how rocky that path has been. Hardcore fans can't get enough of Dynasty Warriors and the other so-called Musou games from developer Omega Force and publisher Koei Tecmo. And yet, to the uninitiated, the series often comes across as boring and stale. Whether you land on that debate, the franchise has survived over 25 years for a reason. Today, we're taking a closer look at the history of the Dynasty Warriors series, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. Join us as we dig deeper into how the team at Koei managed to create the series' groundbreaking 1 vs 1000 gameplay, and how they've successfully carried this style forward.
TapTap.
In the early 90s, Koei's historical strategy games were selling like hotcakes, and their customer service department's phones were ringing off the hook. One of those calls came from a young gamer, seeking advice on how to get Nobunaga's Ambition Lord of Darkness running smoothly on their PC-88 computer. With the patient guidance of a Koei customer service representative, this issue was swiftly resolved. It was just another job well done for the customer service team. But for Kenichi Ogasawara, it left a lasting impression. Ogasawara was already a diehard fan of Koei's games before he made that fateful phone call. In junior high, he spent much of his spare time playing through every edition of the Nobunaga's Ambition and Romance of the Three Kingdoms games. It was his desire to play Nobunaga's Ambition Lord of Darkness that led him to take on the part-time job and save money to buy a PC-88 computer. Ogasawara was so impressed with Koei's customer service and so passionately obsessed with its games that he set a new goal after the call. He would study design and programming, with the aim of eventually joining Koei and working on Nobunaga's Ambitions games for himself. Though he studied chemistry in college, Ogasawara was exceptionally bright and quick to learn. He quickly grasped the essentials of programming and game design. With this newfound knowledge, he aced his interview with Koei, earning himself a position at the company. It just wasn't the job he wanted. Ogasawara had hoped to work in the planning department, but Koei assigned him to the programming department instead. Rather than working on the new installment of Nobunaga's Ambition, he was tasked with porting Koei's PC and arcade games to Nintendo consoles. He did his best to ignore this minor setback. He accepted the challenge and diligently completed all of his assigned tasks. After 6 months of hard work, he was finally transferred to the planning department and was given the opportunity to help develop original games for Koei. In the mid-90s, Sony PlayStation emerged as a top competitor in the console market, disrupting Nintendo's era of dominance. Aware of the new platform's strong potential, Koei was eager to develop an exclusive game for the PS1. And with the increased power of this hardware, the publisher decided it was time to move beyond the realm of strategy and simulation games. Now that he was in the planning department, Ogasawara was able to offer bold suggestions. What if Koei developed a 3D fighting game? It was an outrageous idea, but Koei agreed to take a chance on it and formed the company's fourth business division in 1996, naming the new development group Omega Force. Ogasawara was joined at Omega Force by Koei veterans like programmer Akihiro Suzuki. The newly formed team quickly began work on what would later become the first entry in the Dynasty Warriors series. Very few developers at Koei had extensive knowledge of how to work with 3D engines at this point, so Ogasawara took on the responsibility of teaching himself. He also took on the challenge of integrating the world of Romance of the Three Kingdoms into Dynasty Warriors 1, believing that weapon duels between generals would be more interesting than traditional hand-to-hand combat. Ogasawara even experimented with things like motion capture technology, which was considered cutting edge at the time. In total, development of the first Dynasty Warriors took 19 months. It was released in Japan in February 1997, and contrary to the team's modest expectations, it sold over 70,000 copies in just 3 days. Dynasty Warriors proved popular with fans of 3D fighting games, but its recreations of the one-on-one duels from Romance of the Three Kingdoms struck a chord with many history enthusiasts as well. The triumphant success of Dynasty Warriors earned Omega Force fame within Koei and also strengthened their partnership with Sony. To no one's surprise, Koei was asked to make a sequel for Sony's quickly approaching next-generation hardware, the PlayStation 2. A traditional sequel wouldn't be enough though. Ogasawara had another bold idea. He wanted to abandon the fighting game approach and shift the Dynasty Warriors sequel into a hack and slash. This would become Dynasty Warriors 2 and would be the origin of the phase that became synonymous with the Dynasty Warriors series, 1 vs 1000. Koei was different from many other gaming companies at the time. But one of the biggest differences was that it actually had a full historical research team. After all, the majority of Koei's games were strategy and simulation titles based on real historical settings, and the company was devoted to some degree of accuracy. As Omega Force began work on Dynasty Warriors 2 though, all the researchers at Koei were busy consulting on other projects. That meant Ogasawara and his crew had to rely on their own knowledge, built up from years of novels, movies, and non-fiction books about the Three Kingdoms era. The self-taught historians on the Omega Force team were quite confident in their wisdom though, with some developers going as far to say that they knew the history behind the Romance of the Three Kingdoms like the back of their own hand. Of course, capturing the epic scale of Romance of the Three Kingdoms would require massive battles, much bigger than the one-on-one fights of the first Dynasty Warriors. With this in mind, Ogasawara and Suzuki began work developing an advanced AI system based around grouping enemies together for strategic purposes. 8 enemy soldiers would form a unit, and 20 units would form an army. A single AI-controlled general could lead a full army's worth of soldiers, so that when the general moved, attacked, or retreated, over 100 soldiers could follow them. To help pull gamers into the drama and action of the Three Kingdoms historical era, Dynasty Warriors 2 players would be able to choose between a variety of playable generals, and fight through levels inspired by real battles. Due to the significant change in gameplay style, Omega Force decided to add the word Shin, meaning true, to the gameplay's title, signifying that this would be the true beginning of the Dynasty Warriors series. Thus, the Japanese title, Sengoku Musou, became Shin Sengoku Musou. The Shin naming convention doesn't translate very naturally to English though. Thus, when the true Dynasty Warriors launched in the West, it carried the title Dynasty Warriors 2. And thus, every Dynasty Warriors release since then has been one higher for the Western markets, as compared with the Japanese titles. Dynasty Warriors 2 was successfully launched for PlayStation 2 in August 2000, and the new direction for the series quickly proved a huge hit. Even for Western audiences who were much less familiar with the Three Kingdoms era and the major Chinese historical figures who led the game's cast, Dynasty Warriors 2 managed to pull players in by immersing them into the battlefield. Conflicts like the Yellow Turban Rebellion and the Battle of Wuzang Plains soon became regular talking points for American gamers who had never, ever heard of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, much less read a book about Chinese history. It was enough that gamers were even willing to overlook some fairly big design flaws. Though fun, the game was full of bugs, shoddy hit detection, and other issues that could make it hard to return to now. In addition to improved graphics and impressive areas filled to the brim with enemy soldiers, Dynasty Warriors 2 music was also a standout. Sound director Masayoshi Sasaki enhanced the soundtrack with more drums, bass, and electric guitar parts, creating heavy metal interpretations of ancient melodies. The high-energy music helped set Dynasty Warriors apart from Koei's other more traditional historical games. Sales of the game reflected positively on many changes Omega Force implemented, with Dynasty Warriors 2 surpassing 800,000 copies sold, several times more than its predecessor. At the time, except for a few veterans, most of Omega Force's developers were seen as newcomers at Koei. After the success of Dynasty Warriors 2, however, they became company heroes. Unsurprisingly, another sequel was immediately put on the schedule. Changing direction once more, Ogasawara passed the baton of leadership onto the next game in the series to 2 of his colleagues. Akihiro Suzuki, who had worked as a programmer on multiple previous projects at Koei, would take over as the director, and Tamahiko Sho, who had been involved in planning on Dynasty Warriors 2, would take over as the lead game designer. This duo had ideas for the future of the Dynasty Warriors series that ended up meshing together very well. Suzuki wanted to broaden the gameplay to make it more enjoyable to a wider audience. Meanwhile, Sho believed that drawing inspiration from the exaggerated action in manga and anime would draw more interest and excitement than sticking to the more traditional style of Romance of the Three Kingdoms. To achieve these goals from the series' new leaders, Dynasty Warriors 3 underwent significant modifications and improvements. These included considerable advancements to the game's graphics and the introduction of complete systems of RPG-style character progression, items, and upgrades. Some of those items were incredibly difficult to unlock and became like a badge of honor among Dynasty Warriors fans. Take for example the red hair saddle, which gave players access to the fastest horse in the game. To access this item, players first had to defeat Lu Bu during the Battle of Hu Lao Gate. Anyone who's played a single Dynasty Warriors game knows that Lu Bu is a notoriously difficult character who is not easy to take down. There's a reason that "Do Not Pursue Lu Bu" became a meme in the Dynasty Warriors fandom. Even the most skilled and dedicated gamers likely died many times at the wrong end of Lu Bu's halberd as they tried to unlock this item. In addition to the item system, character designs were also expanded on in Dynasty Warriors 3, in many cases becoming more exaggerated than they'd been in previous installments. For instance, Zhongyi, a renowned general from Wei, was given a more androgynous appearance, while Wei Yan, a prominent general from later in the Three Kingdoms era, was reinterpreted as a bloodthirsty berserker who spoke like a caveman. Dynasty Warriors 3 also introduced mythological figures who had nothing to do with Three Kingdoms, like Nu Hua, a serpent goddess, and Fu Ji, one of the legendary lords said to have started civilization. Though they broke with the aim for historical authenticity that many Koei games had followed up to this point, these comic-style characters added dramatic flair and flavor to the game that most players greatly appreciated. The game's scope was also substantial, expanding from the previous installment's 8 stages and 28 characters to 23 stages and 41 characters. It was also the first Dynasty Warriors title to make its way to Microsoft's new Xbox console, although it arrived a year after its PlayStation 2 launch of September 2001. With all these elements in place, Dynasty Warriors 3 was able to lay down a strong foundation for subsequent entries in the Dynasty Warriors series. In just 4 months, Dynasty Warriors 3 sold over 1 million copies, becoming the first game under Koei to achieve this milestone on a single platform. It was an impressive enough feat that big-name publishers in the West like EA and THQ came knocking with distribution agreements for Koei to sign. While Dynasty Warriors 3 introduced the series to a greater number of players outside of Japan than ever before, it would carry that momentum forward in a big way. Dynasty Warriors 4 was to become the best-selling entry in the series, with a cross-platform strategy that included releases on PlayStation 2, Xbox, and eventually as Dynasty Warriors 4 Hyper on PC. So why was Dynasty Warriors 4 such a massive hit? For one thing, it doubled down on the previous game's work on more exciting character designs. For example, Lu Bu completed his transformation into the infamous badass he's now known as, giving off a domineering aura in his red lacquered armor and golden crown. Xiao Yun, a fan-favorite hero who has often been featured as the cover character or the first suggested general on the character select screen, also received a makeover. His long flowing hair and dignified blue and white armor made him the epitome of a chivalrous hero. While the general changes to gameplay between the third and fourth installments may have not seemed all that substantial, they certainly were impactful, with plenty of new items and storylines introduced. Among the game's more notable additions, the returning Musou and free modes both allowed players to switch between characters before battle, and in some instances they could even select different stages. A new one-on-one duel system made it easier than ever to take on annoying enemy generals away from the protection of their armies, but it also made it easier than ever to get embarrassingly destroyed by Lu Bu. The most significant improvement in Dynasty Warriors 4 could be seen in its overall presentation, with more vivid and dynamic visuals, CG, and cutscenes. As we mentioned earlier, Dynasty Warriors 4 was a massive hit, selling double that of its predecessor at over 2.2 million copies. Following this victory, Omega Force decided to use Dynasty Warriors 4 as a template to develop Samurai Warriors, the first in what would eventually become dozens of different spin-offs and expansions of the Musou formula. Development of Samurai Warriors caused development of the next Dynasty Warriors game to be delayed, but just a little bit. Fans only had to wait 2 years after the release of the fourth game to see what Koei would do with Dynasty Warriors 5. Though it started on PlayStation 2 and Xbox, Dynasty Warriors 5 also moved into the next generation of hardware with ports to the Xbox 360 and PC. More enemy soldiers could appear on the screen than ever before in the series, but the basic nameless grunts also had lowered AI, making them easier to cut down than ever. In that sense, Dynasty Warriors 5 could be considered the pinnacle of the series, as it was the first entry to fully embody the 1 vs 1000 fantasy. In fact, the 5th installment ranks high in player polls for the best Dynasty Warriors game. Despite being fondly remembered, Dynasty Warriors 5 wasn't able to surpass 4 in sales. It ended up selling around 1.7 million copies, quite a bit less than the previous entry and even just below the sales of Dynasty Warriors 3. It seemed that the overwhelming frequency of new Dynasty Warriors releases was starting to affect player excitement. For many, it felt like Koei kept churning out Dynasty Warriors games back to back without much in the way of innovation. Omega Force recognized this as an issue and decided it had to implement changes to the series. They ventured into the realm of online gaming with Dynasty Warriors Online. That one didn't show up in America until years after its Japanese release, and it only lasted a few years here before servers were shut down. They combined Dynasty Warriors with Mahjong to create Musou. That one never made its way to the West, which sort of makes sense considering how tiny the Mahjong audience is here. They even brought together the characters of Samurai Warriors and Dynasty Warriors in 2007 to create a historical Warlord Dream match called Musou Orochi, released in North America as Warriors Orochi. As exciting as these spin-offs were, however, the series' most substantial overhaul wouldn't come until the release of Dynasty Warriors 6. Dynasty Warriors 6 completely transformed the series' gameplay by eliminating the charge attack and replacing it with the Renbu system. This more complicated mechanic required players to string attacks without taking damage in order to build up the length of their combo string. Characters were also given the ability to swim, and siege warfare became more complex as soldiers could carry ladders into the battle to create new assault routes on castle walls. The ideas in Dynasty Warriors 6 read as ambitious and potentially transformative for the series. Players could destroy city gates, capture strongholds, perform cliff dives to surprise enemy generals, and even use their character's special attacks to set fire to cities and create arrow storms. On paper, all of these new features should have led to a groundbreaking new lease on life for Dynasty Warriors as a franchise. The reality wasn't so sunny though. Between Dynasty Warriors, Samurai Warriors, Warriors Orochi, and an increasing number of spin-offs, Omega Force's workload at the time was overwhelming. The core team working on Dynasty Warriors 6 didn't have the supervision and guidance they needed to bring all these new ideas to life, and as such, the game ended up an imperfect and largely unfinished product. Many stages and characters were cut, a significant number of animations were reused, and even the unique weapons for each general, a staple of the series, were skimped out on. Even beyond the content shortcomings, Dynasty Warriors 6 suffered the numerous optimization issues and bugs. It received some of the lowest review scores the franchise had ever seen, and the general fans weren't happy either. While some players appreciated the unique character and battlefield designs in Dynasty Warriors 6, the negative response from many critics and fans had an impact. Sales dipped even lower, and Omega Force became much less willing to experiment or innovate. Subsequent titles such as Dynasty Warriors Strike Force on the PlayStation Portable were created more conservatively as a result. For better or for worse, Dynasty Warriors 7 would mark a return to tradition. Fortunately, with the merger of Koei and Tecmo in April 2009, Omega Force was given a lot more resources and development time. As a result of being given more space to work with Dynasty Warriors 7, featured lengthy CG and cutscenes amounting to hours of story. It also delved deeper than ever into the romance of the Three Kingdoms, moving further along the historical timeline and adding a brand new playable faction, the Jin Dynasty. It wasn't just more cutscenes though. Dynasty Warriors 7 wove storytelling into its gameplay in a more seamless and immersive way than Koei had ever attempted before. It boasted an epic yet tragic story that felt more befitting of the source material. Before the Battle of Yiling in the Shu campaign, for example, Liu Bei learns of the deaths of Huang Yu and Zheng Fei. The news infuriates him to the point that he slices his own throne in half before letting out a cry of grief. Or with Hu's narrative, Xiong Xiao's early demise and dying trust in Xiong Xuan to take over his legacy continue to be among the series' most memorable moments. As you can tell from these examples, Dynasty Warriors 7 adopted a more serious and somber perspective. It faithfully portrayed the historical drama of the Three Kingdoms and encouraged players to explore these stories fully in order to be able to unlock newly added Jin faction. These changes allowed Dynasty Warriors to showcase a warmer, more human perspective. And for players who were already familiar with the ending of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, these changes were touching. Perhaps because the storyline in the 7th installment was already quite comprehensive, the 8th installment mainly focused on visual improvements and minor system adjustments. To help fill in the story of the Jin Dynasty, the game introduced more what-if scenarios. Although these what-if scenarios had some questionable points, they were largely able to remain relatively in line with the series' loose approach to history. Dynasty Warriors 8 also introduced numerous female warriors to the game, which gave players even more options to battle. Characters like Xiang Chuhua and Lu Fu's daughter Lu Huankui quickly became fan favorites. In all, Dynasty Warriors 8 expanded the series roster to its largest number yet, with a whopping 82 playable characters. Truly, there was something here for everyone. After a cautious but relatively well-received return to a form with Dynasty Warriors 7 in 2011, and Dynasty Warriors 8 in 2013, Omega Force and Koei Tecmo were ready to try another grand experiment. They decided to go all out and invest in the most extensive, time-consuming development process yet for Dynasty Warriors 9. This investment sadly wouldn't pay off as much as the team had hoped. Hardcore Dynasty Warriors fans knew to be skeptical when they first heard promises that Dynasty Warriors 9 would be a true evolution for the series. They had experienced the heartbreak and frustration of Dynasty Warriors 6 and knew just how bad things could get, or so they thought. Koei Tecmo and Omega Force launched Dynasty Warriors 9 in 2018, touting it as the series' first entry into the open world genre, and it was a complete mess. Among Dynasty Warriors 9's many problems, it seemed that Omega Force did not fully recognize how much power it would take to provide players with a huge open world. Though it never quite reached the point of being unplayable, the game suffered from massive performance issues, a wildly unstable frame rate, and a non-stop barrage of bugs. The open world that was Dynasty Warriors 9's biggest selling point felt vast but empty, and most of its side quests centered around killing a few wild beasts or bandits. Players who stuck to the main storyline soon discovered that it strictly adhered to linear plot levels, which contradicted the point of having an open world in the first place. The Musou combat system was revamped once again in Dynasty Warriors 9, and once again, the rework disappointed players. A new one-button skill system was intended to resemble traditional action RPG combat, but this system had characters sharing a number of generic moves and weapon types. That meant that even with 90 playable characters, things tremendously got dull. And for a series that has always been about being able to take on thousands of bad guys at once, Dynasty Warriors 9 somehow managed to be too easy. It wasn't uncommon for players to encounter a boss general, get hyped up for an epic fight, and then slaughter them with just one attack. Review scores for Dynasty Warriors 9 barely avoided falling below the series low of Dynasty Warriors 6, but the game's reputation among fans was considerably worse. Adding insult to injury, 2019 marked the end of a long legal battle between Koei Tecmo and Capcom. Since the PlayStation 2 days, Koei had been selling what were essentially standalone expansion packs for the Dynasty Warriors games in the form of Dynasty Warriors Extreme and Dynasty Warriors Empires releases. Capcom claimed this infringed one of its patents. Courts in Japan agreed, and Koei Tecmo was ordered to pay over $1 million to Capcom. Despite the lawsuit, a fully standalone Dynasty Warriors 9 Empires was released in 2021 and remains the most recent Dynasty Warriors title as the time of this video's creation. Reaction to the Dynasty Warriors 9 Empires was similarly subdued, though players seemed to appreciate the addition of marriage, with characters able to produce children that would then get added to their roster of custom officers. Here's hoping Omega Force and Koei Tecmo try out that system again someday on a much better game. It may seem like we've outlined every entry in the series, but if you dig deeper, you'll find the Dynasty Warriors catalog to be even more expansive, with dozens of unique entries. From the mainline games to the spin-offs like Samurai Warriors, to games licensed from anime like the 4 One Piece Pirate Warriors games. Even Nintendo has gotten in on the action, working with Omega Force and Musou games based on the Fire Emblem and Legend of Zelda franchises. Taken as a whole, Omega Force and Koei Tecmo have pumped out over 50 Musou games or Musou game spin-offs in just 25 years. With a catalog that vast, it's inevitable that some of these releases must be uneven. Some, like Dynasty Warriors 5, remain fan favorites to this day. Others, like the most recent Dynasty Warriors 9, have sparked feelings of disappointment and uncertainty over what Koei may have in store for the series in the future. With the 30th anniversary of Dynasty Warriors fast approaching, it's likely we'll hear official word of Dynasty Warriors 10 at some point. And we're curious as any Musou fan must be to discover what approach the next entry will take. Will it return to the roots of older titles, or will it expand upon more recent releases by trying to offer a fresh perspective on the much explored events of the Three Kingdoms era? All we can do is wait and speculate. Fortunately, there are plenty of Dynasty Warriors games to keep us busy in the meantime. Not to mention spin-offs like Hyrule Warriors and Persona 5 Strikers. If you've never given this series a shot or couldn't quite understand the appeal of the 1 vs 1000 formula, we hope we've given you an insight into the magnetic pull of Dynasty Warriors' exhilarating blend of action, absurdity, drama, and sure, maybe a little bit of history. Now's as good a time as any to try it out for yourself. Just maybe not Dynasty Warriors 9.